What if the man who cheated his way to the top understood greatness better than anyone who ever beat him? I know how that sounds. I've lived with that question for a long time. The world remembers Seoul 1988. They remember 9.79 seconds. They remember the press conference, the strip medal, the name that became shorthand for everything wrong with professional sport. That story has been told 10,000 times, and it will be told 10,000 more. But here is what nobody ever asked. Who did I study? Who did I watch, not to defeat, but to understand? Who were the men I measured myself against, not because I hated them, but because I genuinely believed they had something I needed to see? At 64 years old, those 5 names tell you something that the scandal never could. They do not tell you about speed. They tell you about the athlete I was trying to become and the one I never quite managed to be. He never ran a race that anyone remembers. He never stood on a podium. He never wore a number on his chest. But Charlie Francis is the most important person on this list because without him, there's no story to tell. I was a teenager when Charlie first saw me run. Raw, powerful, undisciplined. I had speed that most coaches would have been happy to work with and left mostly as it was. Charlie was not most coaches. He looked at what I had and immediately started thinking about what it could become. He did not teach me to run faster. That is not how he thought. What he did was rebuild me from the ground up. My starting position, my block mechanics, the angle of my first 3 strides, the way I loaded force into the track, all of it was taken apart and put back together with a precision I had never experienced before. He studied film, he studied physiology. He built a training system around one specific idea, that the first 30 meters of a 100-meter race could be turned into a weapon that no one on earth could answer. And he was right. At my peak, at the 1988 Seoul Olympics, 100-meter final, no one on that start line could match what I did in those opening strides. Not Carl Lewis, not Linford Christie, not anyone. That was not talent alone. That was Charlie's architecture expressed through my body. But what I admire most about Charlie is not the system, it is the trust. In a career full of people who wanted something from me, Charlie simply wanted me to be the best version of myself. That kind of belief is rare. I did not understand how rare until much later. There's no way to talk about my career without talking about Carl Lewis. The two of us are connected in a way that goes beyond rivalry. We defined each other. Carl was everything I was not. Where I was explosive and aggressive, he was smooth and controlled. Where I front-loaded every race with maximum force from the first millisecond, Carl was patient, almost dangerously patient. He would come off the blocks, find his rhythm, and then somewhere around 60 meters, something would shift. He would start closing. And once Carl Lewis started closing, very few men on earth could hold him off. The split tells the story clearly. In the 1988 Seoul Olympics 100-meter final, I led through the first 30 meters. No one disputes that. But Carl was closing in the final 20. The gap between us at the finish line was not large. It never was. That is what I admire about him, not the talent, which was obvious to anyone with eyes. What I admire is that Carl forced me to be perfect. You could not run a good race against him and expect to win. You had to be flawless from the moment the gun fired, because if you gave him anything in the back half, he would take it without hesitation. Carl Lewis did not just make me faster. He made me intolerant of my own mistakes. That kind of pressure does not come from an enemy. It only comes from someone you genuinely respect. Most people my age have never watched Valery Borzov run. I think that is a mistake worth correcting. The Soviet sprinter won the 100-meter gold at the Munich Olympics in 1972, long before my name meant anything in this sport. And he won it in a way that I still think about today. I remember the first time Charlie showed me footage of Borzov racing. I watched it and felt genuinely unsettled. Not because he was faster than the men I was competing against. The times were different, the era was different. So what unsettled me was how he looked doing it. He did not look like he was working. His stride was unhurried. His rhythm was almost musical. He ran like someone who had already solved the problem that everyone else was still fighting through. The technical word for what Borzov had is stride economy. The ability to generate speed without burning through unnecessary tension, unnecessary effort, unnecessary force. I ran like I was fighting the track. Borzov ran like the track was on his side. Watching him planted the first quiet doubt in my mind. I was winning, I was dominant, but was I spending more than I needed to? That question had no answer yet. It would find one, and it would find it wearing red. Donovan Bailey won the 100-meter goal at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, 8 years after Seoul. Same event, same distance, same Canadian flag. I watched it happen. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because it would be easy to say I was happy for him, that I cheered for Canada, that sport is bigger than any one person. Maybe some of that is true. But sitting there watching another Canadian sprinter stand on the podium that I had stood on and then been removed from, watching that flag go up again in an event I dominated, that is not a simple feeling. That is not something you process in an afternoon. What I admire about Donovan Bailey is not that he was faster than me. Off the blocks, he was not. His start was solid, but it was not a weapon the way mine was at my peak. What Donovan had was something I never managed to hold on to. A clean story. A finish that held up under scrutiny. A career that people could celebrate without lowering their voice. He ran his race, he won his race, and then he walked away with his legacy exactly where he left it. I did not understand until much later what that actually costs, what it takes day after day to protect something as fragile as a reputation in a sport that is always watching. Donovan Bailey showed me that speed was never really the point. The point was what you carried across the finish line. When Usain Bolt ran 9.58 seconds at the Berlin World Championships in 2009, I sat with that number for a long time. Not because it was fast, I knew it was fast. Everyone knew it was fast. I sat with it because of how he did it. Bolt is 6 feet 5 inches tall. Every biomechanical model that existed before him said a sprinter that tall should be at a disadvantage. Too many moving parts, too much height to control. His start is not special. His first 30 meters are not what wins him races. By every measure that Charlie had built my career around, Usain Bolt begins incorrectly. And then he runs 9.58 seconds. I have watched his races more times than I can count. What I keep coming back to is not the speed, it is the ease. There is a looseness in Bolt that I never had and never could manufacture. I ran like I was forcing speed into my body, pressing it in from the outside through sheer will and physical aggression. Bolt runs like speed is already inside him and all he's doing is getting out of its way. The difference sounds small. It is not small. That kind of relaxation at maximum velocity is almost physiologically impossible to train. You either have it or you do not. Watching Bolt made me realize something I had never been able to put into words before. I had spent my entire career asking one question: how do I run faster? Bolt seemed to be answering a completely different question: how do I stop fighting myself? I never found that answer. I'm not sure I ever really looked for it. 5 names, 5 different decades, 5 completely different ways of understanding what it means to be fast. But when I look at all 5 of them together, I see something I missed for most of my life. Francis, Lewis, Borzov, Bailey, Bolt, none of them were fighting themselves. Every single one of them had a stillness I never found. A calm at the center of everything they did that allowed them to perform without getting in their own way. I had the acceleration, I had the system, I had the drive that most athletes only dream about. But I never had that stillness. I was always pressing, always forcing, always trying to control something that perhaps was never meant to be controlled. These 5 men were not just people I admired. They were the pieces of the athlete I spent my whole career trying to become. Because in the end, the fastest man in the world was not chasing other people. He was chasing a version of himself that never truly existed.